My name is Ilias Thorne, and I am the man who killed the first vampire. The air still tasted of ozone and something ancient, like burnt iron and forgotten dust. My hands, slick with a cold sweat that wasn't mine, still vibrated from the impact. The stake carved from a forgotten oak had splintered, but not before it found its mark. Not into flesh, not into bone, but into something far older. Something that resisted with the force of a dying star. Killed the first vampire. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. It pressed down on me in the crumbling crypt, suffocating blanket woven from centuries of undisturbed dust and the sudden, profound absence of a primordial evil. My breath hitched, ragged and loud in the sudden void. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum solo against the metallic temps of fear coating my tongue. I stumbled back, my knees weak, the stone floor cold and gritty beneath my worn boots. The torch, clutched in my trembling hand, cast dancing shadows that seemed to mock my victory, twisting into grotesque caricatures of the thing I'd just ended. It wasn't a creature of myth, not really. Not the suave, cape-swirling kind. This was something else, something that had existed before names, before fear had a definition. It was a calcified horror, a living fossil of dread, and I, Ilias Thorne. A man who usually spent his nights poring over forgotten texts and nursing cheap whiskey had driven a stake through its heart, or what passed for one. My life, until that moment, had been a quiet pursuit of forgotten lore, a solitary existence fueled by dusty manuscripts, in the faint hope of uncovering truths the world had conveniently buried. My want, as I'd come to understand it, was knowledge. The kind that peeled back the layers of reality, even if what lay beneath was monstrous. That hunger for understanding, that quiet obsession, had led me to this crypt, to this impossible act. The tremors started subtly, a phantom vibration in the floor, a low hum that seemed to resonate in my teeth. The thought was a cold, sharp blade twisting in my gut. I'd known, intellectually, that the first wouldn't be alone, that its existence implied a lineage, a vast, unseen network. But knowing and feeling it were two different things. Now, the silence wasn't empty. It was pregnant with anticipation, 1,000 unseen eyes turning, focusing, hunting. I scrambled out of the crypt, the stale, earthy scent of disturbed soil clinging to my clothes. The moon, a sliver of bone in the bruised sky, offered little comfort. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl became a whisper, a warning. My mind, usually a fortress of logic, began to fray at the edges. Was that a shadow, detaching itself from the ancient oak, or just the wind playing tricks? Did the faint, sickly, sweet scent of decaying lilies truly waft from the forest, or was it a phantom echo of the crypt's putrid breath? The journey back to my isolated cabin was a blur of paranoia. Every snap of a twig behind me, every glint of moonlight on a dew-kissed leaf, sent jolts of ice through my veins. I kept telling myself it was just the adrenaline, the shock of what I'd done. But the feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was too pervasive, too real. It wasn't just a sense, it was a pressure, a cold weight on my shoulders, a whisper at the edge of my hearing that sounded like my own name, drawn out and sibilant. The next few days were a waking nightmare. Sleep offered no escape, only vivid, visceral dreams of pale faces with too wide smiles, of shadows stretching impossibly long, of a chorus of whispers that promised retribution. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the phantom taste of copper and fear still in my mouth, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My concentration, usually laser-sharp when deciphering ancient scripts, was shattered. I'd find myself staring blankly at a page, the words blurring, my mind replaying the final, agonizing moments of the first. Guilt gnawed at me, survivor's guilt perhaps, for having walked away from something so profoundly evil, or perhaps guilt for having disturbed it at all. My phone, usually a lifeline, became a source of dread. Calls to my few contacts went unanswered, or worse, ended in static that seemed to hum with a malevolent intelligence. My old friend Sarah, who usually answered on the first ring, now had a voicemail that simply repeated, "The number you have dialed is not in service," over and over. A cold dread settled in my stomach. They weren't just coming for me. They were cutting me off, isolating me. The silence that followed each failed call was worse than any scream, amplifying the sense of being utterly alone, a single, vulnerable target in a world that was rapidly turning hostile. The cabin, my sanctuary, began to turn against me. The familiar creaks of old wood became deliberate groans. The wind whistling through the eaves sounded like a mournful wail. I'd catch glimpses in the polished surface of my antique desk, or the dark glass of the window at night, a fleeting distortion. A face that wasn't mine, eyes too wide, a smile too thin, gone before I could truly focus. I started covering every reflective surface, a desperate, futile act against an enemy that seemed to exist beyond the physical. The air itself felt heavy, dense, as if the very atmosphere was pressing down on me, mirroring the anxiety that was crushing my chest. One evening, a faint, rhythmic drip-drip started from the attic. I knew the roof was sound, had checked it myself last spring, yet the sound persisted, growing louder, more insistent, until it felt like a metronome counting down to my demise. I climbed the rickety ladder, flashlight beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. The air up there was thick, heavy, with a cloying scent I couldn't place, like old blood mixed with something sickly sweet, like decaying flowers. There was no leak, no dripping water, just a small, ornate wooden box, half buried under a pile of forgotten blankets. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was a single, ancient tooth, not human. Too long, too sharp, with a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer, and beneath it, a brittle, yellowed parchment. He broke the chain. He unleashed the hunger. Now we feast. The words weren't written in blood, but they might as well have been. The first vampire wasn't a tyrant, a monster to be vanquished. It was a linchpin. Its existence had kept something else, something far worse, at bay. And the first, in my ignorant heroism, had shattered the delicate balance. That they weren't just vengeful progeny. They were the unleashed, a chaotic, ravenous horde now free to roam. And I was their unwitting liberator, their first, most prized target. My mind reeled. The paranoia wasn't just trauma. It was a direct consequence of my actions. The whispers, the shadows, the feeling of being watched. It wasn't just my mind unraveling. It was the world itself shifting, becoming a hunting ground. The everywhere monsters trope wasn't a metaphor. It was a terrifying reality. Every seemingly normal person I'd passed on the rare trips to town, every unblinking gaze now felt like a potential threat. I tried to flee. Packed a bag, grabbed my car keys, but the engine wouldn't turn over. Buzz! A dry, clicking sound, like bones rattling. The power flickered, then died, plunging the cabin into absolute darkness. The moon outside, once a sliver, was now a full malevolent orb, casting long, skeletal shadows through the window. I was trapped. Physically, yes, but more terrifyingly, psychologically. My sanity, already hanging by a thread, snapped. The whispers weren't just at the edge of hearing anymore. They were a chorus, a cacophony of ancient, hungry voices echoing inside my skull. My own reflection in the darkened window wasn't just distorted, it was theirs. 1,000 eyes, all staring back at me, 1,000 mouths twisting into a single, horrifying grin. This wasn't a fight I could win with a stake. The monster wasn't outside. It was inside, in my mind, in the very fabric of the world I had unwittingly unleashed. The Ilias moment wasn't just about my physical entrapment. It was the chilling realization that my mind itself was the prison, a form of mental deterioration. Days blurred into a timeless, terrifying haze. I don't know how long I stayed there, huddled in the dark, listening to the whispers, watching the shifting reflections. Eventually, the hunger became too much, the thirst of burning agony. I stumbled out of the cabin, a ghost of a man, driven by a primal need. I found myself on the edge of town, the familiar streetlights, a dizzying blur. People walked by, their faces indistinct, their laughter a distant hollow echo. I caught a glimpse of myself in a shop window, gaunt, wild-eyed, my hair matted. But then, just for a flicker, the reflection shifted. The eyes were too wide, the smile too thin, and for a fleeting, horrifying moment, I saw not my own face, but 1,000 hungry eyes staring back, a silent, knowing promise of the terror I had unleashed. The horror wasn't just after me, it was in me, and it was only just beginning. The world outside the cabin was no longer the one I knew. The air, once crisp with the scent of pine, now carried a faint metallic Thames like old blood. Every shadow seemed to stretch and writhe, not with the natural play of light, but with an unseen, predatory life. I saw them, or thought I did, in the periphery of my vision. Fleeting blurs of movement. Shapes that were almost human, almost animal, always just out of focus. My heart, a frantic drum against my ribs, never truly settled. I tried to blend in, to become invisible. But how do you hide when the hunters are everywhere, when they wear the faces of strangers, of neighbors, of the very people you once thought safe? I saw it in their eyes, sometimes. A flicker of something ancient, something cold, when our gazes met. A subtle shift in their posture, a predatory stillness that belied their mundane clothes. The woman behind the counter at the gas station, her smile too wide, her eyes lingering a moment too long. The old man walking his dog, his gait too fluid, too silent. They were everywhere, and I was the only one who knew, or so I thought. My internal monologue, once a stream of logical deductions and academic musings, had become a fractured, repetitive echo chamber. They know, they're watching, always watching. The words looped, a broken record in my mind, drowning out any attempt at rational thought. I'd argue with myself, desperate to cling to sanity. It's just paranoia, Elias. You're tired. You're traumatized. But then a cold spot would drift through the room, or a distant, almost imperceptible whisper would brush against my ear, and the fragile illusion of normalcy would shatter once more. I remembered the parchment, the ancient tooth. The first wasn't just a powerful vampire, it was a seal. Its death hadn't just freed its progeny. It had unleashed a primal, chaotic force that had been bound for millennia. The vampires I now faced weren't the organized, hierarchical creatures of lore. They were a fragmented, ravenous multitude, each driven by an insatiable, newly awakened hunger, their actions unpredictable, their pursuit relentless. My act of heroism had plunged the world into a new, terrifying age. I tried to find answers, to understand the true nature of what I'd unleashed. I sought out old libraries, dusty archives, places where forgotten knowledge might still reside. But the books I needed were gone, or their pages were blank, or the librarians themselves seemed to watch me with an unnerving stillness. One old archivist, a man with eyes like polished obsidian, simply smiled when I mentioned the first. "Some chains are best left unbroken, young man," he rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "Some hungers, once tasted, can never be sated. The pursuit wasn't always direct. Sometimes it was a psychological game. I'd find my cabin door ajar, though I swore I'd locked it. Items would be subtly rearranged, a book on my desk, a mug in the sink, just enough to make me question my memory, my sanity. The faint scent of decaying flowers, that sickly sweet odor from the crypt, would suddenly fill the air. Even when I was miles away from the cabin, a phantom reminder of the horror I carried within me. One night, I woke to the distinct sound of scratching, rhythmic and insistent, coming from inside my bedroom wall. Not the attic this time, but right beside my head. My heart hammered, a frantic bird trapped in my chest. I pressed my ear to the cold plaster, straining to hear. It wasn't just scratching. It was a faint guttural whisper, a language I didn't understand, yet its intent was clear. "You are ours." I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, an old iron poker, and slammed it against the wall, again and again, until my arms ached and plaster dust filled the air. The scratching stopped. The whispers ceased. A profound, oppressive silence descended, heavier than before. I stood there, panting, the metallic taste of fear and exertion thick in my mouth. For a moment, a brief, deceptive moment, I thought I had driven them back, had fought them off. I slumped against the wall, the poker heavy in my hand, my body trembling. The silence stretched, a fragile peace. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my racing heart, trying to convince myself it was over. Just a nightmare, just my mind playing tricks. I even managed a shaky, humorless laugh. "You did it, Elias. You're safe." But then a new sound, not from the walls, not from outside, from within me. A faint, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It wasn't my heart. It was too slow, too deep, too wrong. It was the sound of a heart beating, not in my chest, but in the very core of my being. A pulse that resonated with the ancient evil I had disturbed. It was the sound of the first vampire's heart, now beating within me, a parasitic echo of its demise. The false ending had been a cruel joke. The monster hadn't been defeated. It simply found a new vessel. Though they weren't just hunting me. They were drawn to me, to the power I now unknowingly carried, to the new first I had become. My struggle wasn't against an external force anymore. It was against the horrifying truth of my own mind, my own corrupted essence. The mirror hadn't just shown me a distorted reflection. It had shown me the truth of what I was becoming. I screamed, but the sound was internal, trapped in my throat, swallowed by the rhythmic thumping that now filled my entire existence. My body convulsed, my knees weak, my palms slick with a cold, unnatural sweat. I was lightheaded, nauseous, the copper taste in my mouth now overwhelming, mixed with something else, something metallic and ancient, like the taste of the crypt itself. I don't know how long I lay there, curled on the floor, listening to the alien rhythm within me. Days, weeks, months, time lost all meaning. The whispers returned, no longer taunting, but welcoming. They were my whispers now, echoing the hunger that had taken root. Eventually the hunger became too much, the thirst of burning agony. Not for water, not for food, for something else, something primal. I stumbled out of the cabin, a ghost of a man, driven by a new, terrifying need. I found myself on the edge of town, the familiar streetlights a dizzying blur. People walked by, their faces indistinct, their laughter a distant, hollow echo. I caught a glimpse of myself in a shop window, gaunt, wild-eyed, my hair matted. But then, just for a flicker, the reflection shifted. The eyes were too wide, the smile too thin, and for a fleeting, horrifying moment, I saw not my own face, but 1,000 hungry eyes staring back, 1,000 mouths twisting into a single, horrifying grin. And then, the thumping within me intensified, a deep, resonant beat that promised power, promised release. The horror wasn't just after me. It was in me. It was only just beginning.